Father dumped his obese 15-year-old at a mountain man's door for being ugly, but he had shocking plans. The wind howls through snow-covered pines. A wagon rattles away, leaving a girl shivering on the cabin steps. Inside, a lonely mountain man stares at her, then does the unthinkable. Instead of turning her away, he takes her in. But the town mocks her. The church bell tolls, whispers spread, and one ruthless saloon-keeper claims she's already been promised to him. Papers are waved, threats are made, yet in the quiet of a lamplight cabin, something impossible begins. Lessons in survival, scripture, and the worth of a soul no one else would see. But when fists fly, blood is spilled, and the girl runs into a blizzard, the mountain man must choose, protect her at all costs, or lose the only family he's ever had. The snow is rising, the law is watching, and the fight for her freedom has just begun. Will a child the world called worthless finally be claimed as priceless, or vanish into the storm forever? Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, backgrounds, and hearts. If values like respect, courage, and compassion still guide you, then you're part of this story too. The bitter winter wind howled through the Colorado highlands, whipping snow into stinging clouds that cut like tiny knives. Daniel McCord's axe rose and fell in a steady rhythm, the sharp crack of splitting wood barely audible above the storm's fury. His breath came out in white puffs as he worked, adding another log to the growing pile beside his cabin. The rough-hewn logs of his mountain home stood dark against the white landscape, smoke curling from the stone chimney. Daniel paused, stretching his back, when an unusual sound caught his attention through the howling wind, the distant creak of wagon wheels struggling through deep snow. He squinted through the swirling white, making out the shape of a horse-drawn wagon emerging from the curtain of snow. It was unusual to see travelers in such weather, especially this far up in the highlands. Daniel set his axe aside and waited, watching as the wagon drew closer. The vehicle lurched to a stop near his cabin. The driver, a hard-faced man with several days' worth of stubble and cold eyes, climbed down from the seat. His movements were sharp with anger as he circled to the wagon's rear, where he roughly grabbed someone's arm and yanked. "Get down!" the man snarled, pulling harder. A young girl tumbled out into the snow. She was wrapped in threadbare rags that did little to protect against the bitter cold, her round form shivering violently. Daniel could see she was heavyset, perhaps 15 years old, with fear written across her face. "Sir," Daniel called out, stepping forward, "what's the meaning of this?" The man, clearly the girl's father from their shared features, sneered as he dragged her toward Daniel's cabin. "Here's your problem now, mountain man. She's useless and ugly. Can't cook, can't clean, can't do nothing but eat." He shoved the girl forward, causing her to stumble in the deep snow. "I'm done feeding a worthless mouth." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Now wait just a minute." But the father was already turning away, trudging back through the snow to his wagon. He climbed up without a backward glance at his daughter, snapped the reins, and urged his horse forward. The wagon disappeared into the white haze of the storm, leaving only tracks that were rapidly filling with fresh snow. The girl stood trembling in her thin clothes, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Please," she whispered, her voice catching. "Please don't send me away. I'll work hard, I promise. I know I'm not much good at anything, but I'll try. Please, ... Daniel knelt in the snow before her, really looking at her for the first time. Her face was round and young, marked by the kind of deep hurt that came from years of cruel words. Her hands, red with cold, clutched at her ragged shawl. But it was her eyes that caught him, wide with fear but also a desperate hope, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to see her true worth. The decision wasn't hard at all. "Come inside," Daniel said quietly, rising to his feet. The girl, Kim was her name, he'd heard her father say it once while berating her, stared at him in shock. "What?" "Come inside," he repeated, gesturing toward his cabin. Storm's getting worse and you're half frozen already." Kim stood rooted to the spot, as if unable to believe his words. Daniel waited patiently, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her toward the cabin's door. She flinched slightly at the contact, but allowed herself to be led. The cabin's interior was warm and clean, if sparse. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. Daniel's few possessions were neatly arranged, some books on rough-hewn shelves, cooking implements hanging from hooks, a bed in one corner and some chairs near the fire. "Sit there," Daniel said, pointing to the chair closest to the hearth. As Kim sank into it, still shivering, he grabbed a wool blanket from his bed and draped it around her shoulders. "Let's get you warm first." Kim clutched the blanket tight, her eyes following Daniel as he moved around the cabin. He added more wood to the fire, then went to the corner where he kept his supplies. "You must be hungry," he said, pulling out some vegetables and dried rabbit meat. "I dot." Kim started to speak, then fell silent, ducking her head. Daniel began preparing a stew, letting the quiet stretch between them. He could see Kim gradually relaxing as the warmth of the fire seeped into her bones, though her shoulders remained hunched, as if expecting a blow. The cabin filled with the savory smell of cooking as Daniel added ingredients to the pot hanging over the fire. Every so often, he caught Kim watching him with a mixture of wariness and wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe this was real. Finally, when the stew was simmering, Daniel pulled up another chair and sat across from her. "You're safe here," he said calmly, his voice gentle but firm. "No one's going to hurt you." Kim's hands twisted in the blanket. But why? Why would you help someone like me?" "Someone like you?" Daniel echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Someone," Kim gestured at herself, shame coloring her cheeks. "Someone useless, ugly, a burden." "Those are your father's words," Daniel said firmly. "Not the truth." Tears welled up in Kim's eyes again, but she blinked them back. The fire popped and crackled, filling the silence between them. Daniel rose to check the stew, stirring it slowly. The familiar motions helped him gather his thoughts. He'd been alone in these mountains for so long, choosing solitude after losing his wife years ago. He'd thought he preferred it that way. But seeing this wounded child, abandoned like unwanted cargo, had awakened something in him he'd thought long buried. A need to protect, to teach, to help heal. He ladled the hot stew into 2 tin bowls, handed one to Kim along with a spoon. She took it carefully, as if afraid she might drop it. "Eat," he encouraged. "Get your strength back." Kim took a small bite, then another, larger one as her hunger overcame her hesitation. Daniel ate his own portion slowly, giving her time to adjust to her surroundings. When both bowls were empty, Daniel set his aside and looked at Kim directly. She seemed more substantial now, warmer, less likely to blow away with the wind still howling outside. "Listen carefully," he said softly, but with conviction that filled the small cabin. "You are no burden here. You will learn, and you will live." Kim's eyes widened at his words, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these seemed different from her earlier ones. A tiny spark of hope had kindled in her expression, fragile as a newly struck match but growing stronger. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the Colorado highlands. But inside the cabin, something new was taking root. The beginning of healing, of trust, of a family forged not by blood but by compassion. Daniel watched Kim's face in the firelight and knew, with absolute certainty, that he'd made the right choice. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light across their faces as they sat in companionable silence, while the winter wind sang its wild song around the corners of what was now their shared home. Morning sunlight crept through the cabin's small window, casting golden squares across the rough-hewn floorboards. Kim blinked awake slowly, momentarily confused by the weight of thick quilts and the unfamiliar scent of pine. Her eyes darted around the cabin's interior, heart racing until memory returned. She was safe. The mountain man, Daniel McCord, had taken her in when her father abandoned her. The quilts were warm and clean, nothing like the threadbare blankets she'd known before. Kim pulled them closer, hardly daring to believe this wasn't a dream. The sound of quiet movement drew her attention to where Daniel stood at the cooking hearth, stirring something in a cast-iron pot. "Good morning," he said without turning, his voice calm and steady. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, sir," Kim whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, sir. Thank you." "Just Daniel is fine," he replied, ladling what looked like cornmeal mush into 2 wooden bowls. "Breakfast is ready. Come eat while it's hot." Kim carefully extracted herself from the quilts, still wearing her clothes from yesterday. Daniel had given her the bed, choosing to sleep in his chair by the fire. The thought made her cheeks burn with shame. She was already being a burden. "I'm sorry you had to sleep in the chair," she mumbled, smoothing her wrinkled dress. Daniel set the bowls on his small table. "No need for sorry. Was my choice." He gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit, eat. We've got work ahead." Kim perched nervously on the chair's edge, watching as Daniel sprinkled a bit of brown sugar over both bowls of mush. The smell made her stomach growl, but she waited until Daniel took his first bite before picking up her spoon. "Survival requires routine," Daniel said between careful spoonfuls. "Out here in the mountains, routine keeps you alive." He paused, studying her face. "I've been thinking about what you need to learn." Kim's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. "Learn?" Her father's words echoed in her head. "Too stupid to learn anything useful." Daniel continued, seemingly unaware of her internal struggle. "Reading first, that's important. Then cooking, basic medicine, how to set traps for food." He took another bite, chewing thoughtfully. "Practical skills. Things that will serve you well." "Reading," Kim's voice cracked on the word. "But I'm not. Father said I couldn't." "Your father was wrong about many things," Daniel said firmly. His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I was a school teacher once, before—" He trailed off, something flickering across his expression before it settled back into calm certainty. "I can teach you." Kim stared down at her bowl, fighting back tears. No one had ever offered to teach her anything before. "I might disappoint you," she whispered. "Not possible," Daniel replied simply. "Eat up, then I'll show you around properly." After breakfast, Daniel began the tour of his cabin. Everything had its place, he explained, showing her where he stored the firewood, carefully organized by size. His trapping equipment hung on designated hooks, each tool clean and well-maintained. A shelf held medical supplies, bandages, herbs, and simple remedies. "Order matters," Daniel said, opening a trunk filled with neat stacks of clothing. "Makes life easier when you know where everything belongs." He pulled out a worn but clean dress. "This was, well, it might fit you. For now, at least." Kim touched the fabric reverently. It was sturdy cotton, far better than her current rags. "Thank you," she managed. The morning passed in a blur of information as Daniel showed her how to bank the fire, where to find fresh water, and which herbs were good for tea. Kim tried to memorize everything, terrified of making a mistake. After a simple lunch of bread and dried venison, Daniel suggested they bring in more firewood. "Storm's coming tonight," he said, glancing at the sky through the window. "Need to stock up." Kim followed him outside, eager to help despite her nervousness. Daniel showed her how to carry the logs, stacking them in her arms carefully. "Don't take more than you can manage," he advised. "Multiple trips are better than dropping the load." But on her third trip, Kim's arms trembled under the weight. One log slipped free, landing on her foot. It didn't hurt much through her thick boots, but the failure was too much. Tears sprang to her eyes as she dropped the remaining logs, covering her face with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry. I can't do anything right. I'm too clumsy, too fat, too—" "Stop." Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. His hand settled gently on her shoulder. "Look at me, Kim." She lowered her hands slowly, expecting to see disappointment in his face. Instead, his expression was kind. "Your worth isn't measured by how many logs you can carry," he said, "or by how you look, or what cruel words others have used against you." He squeezed her shoulder lightly. "It's measured in courage, and you, young lady, showed courage just by getting up this morning and trying." Kim stared at him, tears still rolling down her cheeks. "But I failed." "You dropped some logs," Daniel corrected. "That's not failure, that's learning. Now you know to carry less next time." He bent down, picking up the scattered wood. "Help me gather these up and we'll take them in together." They worked side by side until the woodpile was properly stocked. By then, the sun was setting, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. Daniel prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and Kim managed to eat without feeling guilty about every bite. As darkness fell outside, Daniel lit a lamp and settled into his chair by the fire. From a shelf, he retrieved a well-worn Bible bound in dark leather. "Time for evening reading," he said, opening to a marked page. "Come sit and listen, if you'd like." Kim wrapped herself in one of the quilts and sat cross-legged near his feet, watching the firelight dance across the pages as Daniel began to read. His voice was steady and soothing, bringing the words to life in a way she'd never experienced before. She didn't understand everything he read, but the rhythm of his voice was comforting. Her eyes grew heavy as he continued, the day's emotions and activities catching up with her at last. Just before sleep claimed her completely, Kim whispered into the quiet cabin, "Maybe I can learn." Daniel paused in his reading, looking down at the girl who was already drifting off, her face peaceful for the first time since she'd arrived. He carefully marked his place in the Bible and set it aside, then gently adjusted the quilt around her shoulders. "Yes," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. "You can learn, and you will." The fire crackled softly as Kim slept, while outside the promised storm began to dust the mountains with fresh snow. Dawn broke crisp and clear over the snow-covered mountains. Daniel was already up, stoking the fire when Kim emerged from beneath her quilts. The cabin smelled of coffee and fresh cornbread. "We need to get an early start," Daniel said, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. "It's Sunday." Kim accepted the cup with both hands, savoring its warmth. "Sunday?" "Church day." Daniel pulled his heavy wool coat from its peg. "Time for you to meet the town proper." The cup trembled in Kim's hands. "Town?" Her voice cracked. I don't think I should." Daniel turned to face her, his expression gentle but firm. "You're under my care now. Folks need to know that." He paused, studying her face. "I know you're scared, but hiding won't make it easier." Kim set her cup down, fingers twisting in her worn dress. "They'll laugh. They always do." "Then they'll answer to me." Daniel's voice carried quiet steel. He reached for a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Here, Mrs. Halcombe sent this over last week. Thought I might need it someday." Inside the package was a simple dark blue dress, carefully mended but clean and sturdy. Kim touched it reverently. "It's beautiful." "Get changed. I'll hitch up Moses while you dress." Kim heard Daniel's boots crunch in the snow outside as he went to prepare his old mule. Her hands shook as she pulled on the dress. It wasn't a perfect fit, but it was the nicest thing she'd worn in years. When she stepped outside, Daniel was waiting with Moses hitched to a small wagon. He wrapped her in a patched wool shawl before helping her up onto the seat. "Hold tight," he advised, climbing up beside her. "Trail's slick with snow." Moses plodded forward, his hooves breaking through crusty snow. The wagon creaked and swayed as they descended toward town. Kim huddled deeper into the shawl, her heart pounding faster with each mile. The town appeared gradually through the trees, a scatter of wooden buildings with smoke rising from stone chimneys. At its heart stood a modest white church, its small steeple reaching towards the pale winter sky. Daniel guided Moses to a hitching post near the church. Already, other wagons and horses lined the street. Kim's throat tightened as she saw well-dressed families climbing the wooden steps. "Remember," Daniel said softly, helping her down, "you're not alone." The church's interior was warm, lit by oil lamps and morning sunlight streaming through plain glass windows. Wooden pews creaked as people settled in, hymn books rustling. Kim felt the stares begin as soon as she followed Daniel through the door. "Look at the size of her. That's the girl from... Can't believe he took her in." The whispers seemed to follow them like shadows as Daniel led her to an empty pew near the back. Kim kept her eyes fixed on her hands, folded tightly in her lap. The pastor, a lean man with gray at his temples, approached them before the service began. "Daniel," he said warmly, "good to see you. It's been too long." Daniel stood, one hand resting protectively on Kim's shoulder. "Pastor Williams, I'd like you to meet Kim. She's my apprentice daughter." The words hung in the air like a declaration. Kim's head snapped up, staring at Daniel in wonder. The pastor's eyebrows rose slightly, but his smile remained genuine. "Welcome, Kim," he said kindly. "We're glad to have you with us." As the pastor moved away to prepare for the service, an older woman in a neat black dress approached. Her gray hair was pulled back severely, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. "Daniel," she said quietly. "A word, if you please." Daniel squeezed Kim's shoulder. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Kim watched as the woman, who she would later learn was Mrs. Halcombe, led Daniel to a corner near the coat hooks. Their conversation was too low to hear, but she saw Daniel's posture stiffen, his jaw tightening as Mrs. Halcombe spoke urgently. The service began before Daniel returned, filling the church with familiar hymns. Kim sang softly, remembering fragments from her childhood. Pastor Williams preached about mercy and justice, his words seeming to echo Daniel's kindness. Throughout the service, Kim felt the weight of stares. She heard muffled laughter from a group of young men near the front, saw women whispering behind their hymn books. But she also noticed something else, a tall Native American man standing quietly at the back of the church. Unlike the others, his gaze held no mockery, only quiet understanding. After the final hymn, as people began to file out, Kim heard the man's name mentioned, Henry Running Deer. He nodded slightly as she passed, a gesture of respect that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. The ride home was silent at first, Moses picking his way carefully through the deepening snow. Finally, Kim gathered her courage. "Daniel?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What did Mrs. Halcombe tell you?" Daniel's hands tightened on the reins. "Nothing you need to worry about right now." "Please." Kim twisted the shawl between her fingers. "If it's about me, I should know." Daniel sighed, his breath visible in the cold air. "She said your father made a deal before he left. Tried to sell your services to Pike, the saloon keeper." Kim's blood ran cold. She remembered Pike, a big man with small eyes who always seemed to be watching her when she passed his saloon. "But he can't..." She swallowed hard. "Can he?" "No." Daniel's voice was firm. "Your father has no right to sell what isn't his to give. You're under my protection now, and no man has claim on you. Not Pike, not your father, not anyone." They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. While Daniel tended to Moses, Kim went inside to start supper. Her hands were steady as she stirred the bean pot and sliced cornbread. When Daniel came in, stamping snow from his boots, Kim had 2 bowls ready on the table. "Thank you," he said, settling into his chair, "for coming today. I know it wasn't easy." Kim sat across from him, the fire's warmth at her back. "Thank you," she replied softly, "for saying I was your apprentice daughter." Meant every word. Daniel broke his cornbread into his beans. "Now eat up. Tomorrow we start your reading lessons." Outside, the mountain wind whistled through pine boughs heavy with snow. But inside the cabin, Kim felt warm, safe, and for the first time in years, truly at home. Dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. Inside Daniel's cabin, Kim woke to the sound of boots on wooden floorboards and the crisp scent of fresh coffee. She blinked away sleep, still marveling at the softness of real blankets and the warmth of the banked fire. "Morning," Daniel called softly from the kitchen area. "Best get up now. Plenty to learn today." Kim pushed herself up, straightening her borrowed nightgown. Through the small window, she could see frost patterns etched across the glass, delicate as lace. The morning light was brilliant, almost painful in its clarity, reflecting off the pristine snow outside. "Coffee's hot," Daniel said, setting a tin cup on the table. "Get dressed and we'll have breakfast before starting your lessons." Kim's stomach tightened at the word, lessons, but she nodded, gathering her blue dress from where it hung near the fire. Behind the privacy screen Daniel had erected in one corner, she dressed quickly, the fabric still holding warmth from its place by the hearth. When she emerged, Daniel had bowls of steaming porridge waiting. He'd sweetened it with dried berries and a precious spoonful of honey. Kim ate carefully, savoring each bite, while Daniel outlined the day ahead. "First thing," he said, "you need to learn about providing for yourself. Can't always depend on stores or trading posts up here." He paused, studying her face. "Checked the trapline this morning. Got us a nice fat rabbit." Kim nodded, trying to look eager despite her unease. She'd seen animals cleaned before, but had always turned away, queasy at the sight of blood. After breakfast, Daniel led her to his work table near the back door. A freshly caught rabbit lay on a clean piece of canvas. Its fur was dappled brown and white, winter colors meant to hide it in the snow. Kim's throat tightened. "Now," Daniel began, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "First thing to remember is respect for the creature. It gave its life so we might eat. We don't waste anything." He picked up a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning light. "Watch careful now. I'll show you once, then you'll try." Kim forced herself to keep her eyes open as Daniel demonstrated. His movements were swift and precise, years of practice evident in every cut. He explained each step clearly, how to remove the fur without tearing it, where to make the first incision, how to clean the meat properly. "Your turn," he said finally, stepping back from the table. He handed her a second rabbit, smaller than the first. "Remember what I showed you." Kim's hands trembled as she took the knife. The rabbit's fur was still soft, still holding a trace of warmth. She swallowed hard and tried to copy Daniel's movements. Her first cut was clumsy. The hide tore, and her stomach lurched at the sight beneath. Before she could stop herself, she gagged, turning away from the table. "It's all right," Daniel said quietly. He didn't touch her, but his presence was steady at her shoulder. "Take a breath. Try again when you're ready." Kim wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, shame burning in her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm not very good at this." "Weren't meant to be good at it, first try," Daniel replied. "Took me plenty of practice to get it right. The trying's what matters." His words gave her courage to turn back to the table. This time she moved more slowly, concentrating on each cut. The work was still messy. but she managed to finish without turning away again. "Well done," Daniel said when she'd finished. His approval, though simply stated, warmed her more than the morning coffee had. "We'll save these hides for tanning later. For now, let's get this meat stored proper." They spent the next hour preparing the rabbit meat, some for immediate cooking, some for smoking to preserve it. Daniel showed her how to wrap portions in clean cloth and store them in the cold room he'd dug beneath the cabin floor. As afternoon settled over the mountains, Daniel lit the lamp that hung above the table. Outside, clouds were gathering, promising more snow by nightfall. He disappeared briefly into his bedroom, returning with a worn book bound in faded blue cloth. "Time for your other lessons," he said, setting the primer on the table. "Reckon we'll start with your letters." Kim's heart sank. She'd always struggled with reading, the few times anyone had tried to teach her. The letters seemed to dance and shift before her eyes, refusing to stay still long enough to make sense. Daniel opened the primer to its first pages, where large letters marched in neat rows across the paper. "Start here," he said, pointing to the letter A. "Copy these onto your slate." Kim took the chalk with uncertain fingers. Her first attempts were wobbly, the lines uneven. But Daniel remained patient, guiding her hand when needed, praising her efforts no matter how crude. "Look here," he said after a while, writing something new on the slate. "Know what this spells?" Kim squinted at the letters. K-I-M. Slowly, recognition dawned. That's my name?" "It surely is." Daniel smiled. "Try copying it." Kim traced the letters carefully, joy bubbling up inside her as she formed each one. For the first time, she saw her name as something real, something that belonged to her alone. She hesitated, chalk hovering above the slate. "No one ever showed me before. How to write it, I mean." Daniel was quiet for a moment, something sad passing behind his eyes. "Never too late to learn," he said finally. "The good Lord gives us all gifts. Just takes some folks longer to find theirs." They worked until the lamp began to sputter, warning that the oil was running low. Daniel had prepared a simple supper earlier, rabbit stew with dumplings, and now he served it in deep wooden bowls. As they ate, Kim gathered her courage to speak. "Daniel?" She stirred her stew, watching the vegetables swirl. "Why are you teaching me all this? Most folks don't think I'm worth the trouble." "Most folks are wrong." Daniel's voice was firm but gentle. "God makes no mistakes in whom he places on this earth. Each soul has purpose, has worth. Anyone who says different is speaking against his wisdom." Kim felt tears prick at her eyes, but for once they weren't tears of shame or fear. Something new was growing inside her, a tiny spark of pride, of possibility. After supper, Daniel banked the fire for the night while Kim washed the dishes. The familiar domestic tasks felt different now, purposeful rather than merely dutiful. In her makeshift bed near the hearth, Kim pulled the quilts up to her chin. The cabin was peaceful, filled with the soft sounds of settling wood and the occasional pop from the fire's embers. From memory, she whispered the words Daniel had read to her the night before. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The words felt right in her mouth, solid and true as the letters she'd learned to write. As sleep crept over her, Kim held tight to that feeling, that perhaps she wasn't a mistake after all, that perhaps there was purpose in her being exactly who she was. The lamp's final flicker cast dancing shadows on the wall. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the cabin, warmth and hope had taken root, as steady and sure as Daniel's patient teachings. The snow fell steadily through the night, adding fresh layers to the deep drifts around Daniel's cabin. By morning, the world outside had transformed into a pristine white blanket that stretched as far as the eye could see. Kim woke early, the cabin's chill urging her from beneath her warm quilts. She noticed Daniel had already stoked the fire and left a pot of coffee warming on the stove. Through the frosted window, she could see his tall figure moving through the snow, checking his trap lines. Remembering his lessons about routine, Kim set about her morning tasks. She'd learned where everything belonged in the small cabin. The broom behind the door, kindling in the box by the hearth, cooking utensils hung on their proper hooks. Her movements were still uncertain, but she took pride in knowing what needed doing. The woodpile needed replenishing. Kim pulled on her patched coat and stepped outside. The cold bit at her cheeks as she gathered logs in her arms. The weight made her shoulders ache, but she pressed on, remembering Daniel's quiet words about honest work. On her third trip, her foot caught on a hidden root. She stumbled, logs tumbling from her grasp. One struck her shin, drawing a sharp gasp of pain. Tears sprang to her eyes, not just from the hurt, but from frustration at her own clumsiness. "Easy there," Daniel's voice came from behind her. He'd returned from his morning rounds to find her struggling in the snow. "No need to do it all at once." Kim wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "I'm sorry, I keep dropping things." "Ain't nothing broke but snow," Daniel replied, helping her gather the scattered wood. "Takes time to learn the way of things." Inside, Kim stirred the morning's stew while Daniel cleaned his traps. Her movements in the kitchen were still awkward. She'd already spilled water twice and knocked over the salt cellar. But Daniel never raised his voice, never showed impatience. He simply showed her again how to hold the ladle, how to test if the vegetables were done. Around midday, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Daniel opened it to reveal Henry Running Deer, the Cherokee man from church. Snow dusted his shoulders and dark hair. "Brother," Henry greeted Daniel with a slight bow. "The spirits warned of more snow coming. Thought to check on you." His eyes moved to Kim, and he offered her the same respectful gesture. "Sister." Kim felt her face flush at being addressed so formally. No one had ever shown her such courtesy before. Henry unwrapped a bundle he carried, revealing dried leaves and roots. "Brought medicine," he explained, laying them on the table. "Good for breathing in winter. Cherokee women use these when the cold settles in the chest." "Much obliged," Daniel said, examining the herbs. Henry turned to Kim, his manner gentle but direct. "Our people say these leaves carry strength from the earth itself. When you drink them as tea, you take that strength into your own body." Kim touched the leaves carefully, moved by the gift and the wisdom behind it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Show her how to prepare them?" Daniel asked. Henry nodded, guiding Kim through the process of brewing the medicinal tea. His instructions were clear and patient, just like Daniel's. He spoke to her as if she were any other student, worthy of teaching. "Small sips," Henry advised when the tea was ready. "Let the warmth fill you." The tea was bitter, but not unpleasant. As Kim drank, Henry shared stories of Cherokee healing traditions, speaking with quiet pride of his people's knowledge. She found herself leaning forward, eager to learn more. When Henry departed, promising to return before the next big snow, Kim felt a new sense of connection to the world beyond the cabin. Someone else, besides Daniel, had seen her as a person worth helping, worth teaching. The afternoon light was fading when Daniel brought out his old coat. "Time you learned some sewing," he said, showing her where the seams had worn through. "Every mountain person needs to know how to mend." Kim examined the coat with trepidation. Her fingers, still clumsy from years of being told they were too thick and useless, trembled as she threaded the needle Daniel gave her. "Like this," Daniel demonstrated, making a neat stitch in the torn fabric. "Keep them even, but not too tight." Kim's first attempts were crooked. The needle slipped more than once, pricking her finger and leaving tiny spots of blood on the brown fabric. But Daniel showed her how to knot the thread properly, how to hide the stitches so they wouldn't show. "Sorry about the blood," she mumbled, embarrassed by the marks. "Marks of learning. Daniel replied. "Every skill worth having costs a little blood and sweat." As the evening deepened, Kim finished the last patch. The stitches weren't perfect, but when she tugged at the repair, it held firm. Something warm bloomed in her chest, pride in work done by her own hands. Daniel inspected the mending carefully, running his fingers along the seams. "That's honest work," he said quietly. "Good and strong." Kim stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. No one had ever praised her work before. No one had ever suggested she could create anything of value. Over supper, she kept glancing at the mended coat hanging by the door. Each time she saw it, a small smile tugged at her lips. The stitches might be crooked, but they were hers. She had made something useful, something that would keep Daniel warm. As they cleared the dishes, Daniel paused. "You're learning quick," he said. "Got steady hands when you trust them." Kim ducked her head, but her smile grew wider. For the first time in her life, she felt the warmth of earned praise, of work well done. It was a feeling she wanted to hold on to forever. Night settled over the cabin, bringing with it more snow and wind. But inside, Kim felt warmer than she ever had before. She had carried wood, cooked food, learned about healing plants, and mended a coat, all in one day. More importantly, she had been treated with respect by both Daniel and Henry, as if she were someone worth teaching, worth knowing. As she drifted off to sleep, Kim's fingers traced the small scabs where the needle had pricked her. They didn't hurt anymore. Instead, they felt like badges of honor, proof that she could learn, could work, could be more than what her father had claimed she was. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Daniel's coat, its patches barely visible in the firelight. Her smile lingered even as sleep took her, full of newfound pride and hope. Sunday morning dawned crisp and clear, the fresh snow sparkling like scattered diamonds across the landscape. Inside the cabin, Kim stood before the small mirror Daniel had mounted on the wall, trying to smooth her hair with trembling fingers. The past week's lessons in reading had left her both excited and terrified about attending church again. "You look fine," Daniel said, adjusting his clean collar. He had shown her how to press it yesterday, teaching her to heat the iron just right on the wood stove. Kim tugged at her dress, the same one she had worn last Sunday but now mended and cleaned under Daniel's instruction. "What if I forget the words?" she whispered. "Then we'll remember them together," Daniel replied, wrapping a warm shawl around her shoulders. It was one Mrs. Halcombe had brought by earlier in the week, saying it was just gathering dust in her trunk. The ride to town was quiet, broken only by the crunch of snow under the mule's hooves and the occasional cry of a winter bird. Kim clutched her small Bible, the pages marked where she had practiced reading the same verse over and over until the words flowed smoother. As they approached the church, Kim's heart began to pound. More people filled the wooden pews than last Sunday. The good weather had brought out even the distant farmers. She felt their stares as she followed Daniel to their seat. Some curious, others still dismissive. The service began with familiar hymns. Kim had learned to hum along during the week, as Daniel taught her the tunes while they worked. The music helped calm her nerves, but when Pastor Matthews invited the congregation to share verses they had studied, her hands grew cold with fear. Daniel leaned close. "Remember what we practiced," he murmured. "The truth in those words belongs to you as much as anyone." Kim closed her eyes, remembering the hours spent tracing letters, sounding out words, Daniel's patient corrections and quiet encouragement. Slowly she rose to her feet. A ripple of whispers swept through the church. She heard someone snicker in the back, and her legs nearly gave way. But Daniel's steady presence beside her gave her strength. Her voice quavered, then steadied. "I would like to read from Psalms." Pastor Matthews nodded, his expression kind. "Please do, child." Kim opened her Bible with shaking fingers to the marked page. The words she had practiced seemed to swim before her eyes, but she took a deep breath and began. "The Lord is my shepherd," she read, her voice soft but clear in the hushed church. "I shall not want." As she continued, the familiar words took on new meaning. Each phrase she spoke was a victory over those who had called her worthless. "He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake." The church had fallen completely silent. Even those who had whispered and laughed before sat still, watching the transformation before them. Kim's face glowed not with embarrassment now, but with the light of accomplishment. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." As she finished the psalm, her voice rang with quiet dignity. "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." For a moment, no one moved. Then Pastor Matthews cleared his throat, visibly moved. "Thank you, Kim," he said warmly. "That was beautifully read." Kim sat down, her heart thundering in her chest. Daniel's hand found hers and squeezed gently. She could hear the murmurs starting, not all kind, but many surprised and wondering. "Daniel McCord's surely changing that ugly girl," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Never thought she had it in her," another voice replied. But for once, the cruel words didn't cut as deeply. Kim sat straighter, strengthened by what she had accomplished. The rest of the service passed in a blur, and when it ended, she stood tall beside Daniel. Several church members approached them after the service. Mrs. Halcombe's eyes were wet as she patted Kim's hand. "You did well, child. Very well indeed." Even Henry Running Deer, who had slipped in quietly during the service, nodded to her with deep respect. "Words of power," he said simply. "You spoke them true." As they walked out, Kim held Daniel's arm, no longer trying to hide behind him. She noticed some still sneered, still whispered behind their hands, but their power to hurt her had diminished. She had found her voice, and it had been heard. The ride home was peaceful, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the snow. Kim sat wrapped in her shawl, the Bible cradled in her lap, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sunshine. That evening, as they sat by the firelight after supper, Kim finally spoke about what had happened. "I never thought I could do something like that," she said softly, watching the flames dance. "Standing up in front of everyone, reading those words." Daniel looked up from where he was mending a trap. "Courage grows when truth is spoken," he replied. "Those words you read, they're God's truth about who you are, not what others say, not what you've been told to believe." Kim touched the Bible's worn cover, thinking about the power of words, both to wound and to heal. The cruel words of her father and others had shaped her for so long, but now new words were taking root. Words of dignity, of worth, of possibility. The fire crackled softly as she prepared for bed, spreading her quilt on her pallet near the hearth. For the first time, she truly felt more than just a burden someone had abandoned on a snowy doorstep. She was becoming someone who could stand and speak, who could learn and grow, who could surprise those who had judged her. As sleep began to overtake her, Kim remembered the complete silence in the church after she had finished reading. Not a silence of judgment or mockery, but of respect. She had never known such a feeling before. It wrapped around her like a warm blanket as she drifted off, Daniel's words echoing in her mind. "Courage grows when truth is spoken." The firelight cast soft shadows on the cabin walls, and outside, the wind whispered through the pines. But inside, peace reigned as both Daniel and Kim rested, knowing that another small victory had been won in the battle for her soul's healing. 3 days after Kim's brave reading at church, winter's grip loosened enough for riders to make their way up the mountain trail to Daniel's cabin. The afternoon sun had begun to soften the crusty snow when the sound of approaching hooves broke the peaceful quiet. Daniel looked up from where he was showing Kim how to repair a broken trap spring. His weathered face tightened as he recognized the 3 men riding toward his cabin. Mr. Pike, the saloon keeper, sitting tall and arrogant on his bay stallion, Kim's father, hunched and scowling on a worn-out mare, and Sheriff Calloway, his badge glinting dully in the winter light. "Get inside, Kim," Daniel said quietly, rising to his full height. "Whatever happens, stay there unless I call for you." Kim's hands trembled as she hurried to obey, but she paused at the cabin door, unable to completely shut herself away from what was coming. Through the crack, she watched the men dismount and approach Daniel, who stood firm in the trampled snow of his yard. Mr. Pike stepped forward first, his expensive boots crunching on the icy ground. A folded paper jutted from his coat pocket like a weapon. "McCord," he said, his voice oily smooth. "Fine day for a ride, ain't it?" "State your business," Daniel replied evenly, though Kim could see the tension in his shoulders. The saloon keeper's smile didn't reach his eyes as he pulled out the paper. "Just some legal matters to settle. Seems there's been a misunderstanding about the girl." Kim's father shuffled forward then, not quite meeting Daniel's steady gaze. "She's my flesh and blood," he muttered. "Got rights to her, I do." "Rights you sold away," Daniel's voice cut through the cold air like a knife. "To a man who means to use her for bondage." Sheriff Calloway cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Daniel, let's keep things civil. Mr. Pike here has papers showing the girl's properly indentured." "Proper?" Daniel's quiet voice carried steel beneath it. "There's nothing proper about selling a child into servitude. It's wickedness dressed up in legal clothes, and you know it, Sheriff." Pike's facade of pleasantness cracked slightly. "The law's the law, McCord. These papers say the girl belongs working at my establishment, fair and square. Her father signed them before he ever brought her up here." From her hiding place, Kim's heart hammered against her ribs. She remembered the saloon from her few visits to town. The rough men, the smell of whiskey, the hollow-eyed women who served them. The thought of being forced to work there made her feel sick with fear. Daniel took a step forward, his voice low but carrying clearly in the winter air. "I've seen your establishment, Pike. Seen how you treat those in your power. That girl is under my protection now, and I'll not hand her over to become another of your slaves." The sheriff shifted uneasily in the snow. "Daniel, don't make this harder than it needs to be. If the papers are legal, then come back with a proper warrant," Daniel cut him off. "Until then, that child stays here where she's safe." Pike's pleasant mask slipped completely, revealing the cruel lines around his mouth. "You're standing against the law, McCord. Could be dangerous for a man alone up here in the mountains." "Are you threatening me, Pike?" The quiet question seemed to hang in the frigid air. Even Kim's father took a step back from the controlled power in Daniel's voice. The sheriff raised his hands placatingly. "Nobody's threatening anyone, but Daniel, I'm warning you friend to friend. I may have to come back with that warrant. Might be best to settle this peaceful-like now." "There's nothing to settle," Daniel replied firmly. "That girl was abandoned on my doorstep in a snowstorm by a father who called her worthless. Any papers signed before that are worth less than the ink wasted on them. Now, unless you have a legal warrant in hand, I'll bid you good day." Pike's face darkened, but he kept his voice smooth. "This isn't over, McCord. The law will side with proper papers over a mountain man's conscience." The 3 men mounted their horses, Pike's angry glare promising future trouble. Kim watched through her tears as they rode away, her father never once looking back toward the cabin where his daughter waited. When their horses disappeared down the trail, Daniel stood for a long moment in the yard, his breath making clouds in the cold air. Finally, he turned toward the cabin. "You can come out now, Kim." She pushed the door open with trembling hands. "Daniel?" Her voice quavered. Am I truly safe here?" Daniel's weathered face softened as he looked at her. "Come help me finish with these traps," he said gently. "We'll talk while we work." As they sat together on the cabin's small porch, Daniel's strong hands showed her again how to adjust the spring tension. "You're as safe here as I can make you," he said quietly, "and I mean to make that safer still. But the Sheriff Calloway's not a bad man, just a weak one. He'd rather avoid trouble than face down men like Pike." Daniel tested the trap's mechanism. "But he'll do what's right if he's given no choice." Kim worked in silence for a moment, then whispered, "What if they come back with a warrant?" "Then we'll face that too." Daniel's voice held steady confidence that helped calm her racing heart. "The Lord didn't lead you to my door just to abandon you to men like Pike. We'll find a way." They finished their work as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow. Daniel prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, but Kim found she could barely eat. She noticed Daniel seemed preoccupied as well, his eyes often straying to his desk in the corner where he kept his writing materials. After the dishes were cleaned, Daniel spoke softly. "Time for your reading lesson, then bed. Tomorrow's another day of work." But Kim couldn't focus on the words before her. "Daniel?" she asked hesitantly. "What did Mr. Pike mean about his establishment?" Daniel's face grew grave. "Nothing you need worry about. Pike uses people's weaknesses, drink, gambling, desperation, to trap them in debt. Then he claims they owe him work to pay it off. It's slavery by another name, and it's not going to happen to you." Kim nodded, but her hands shook as she closed her primer. "I'm scared," she admitted in a small voice. Daniel's strong hand covered hers for a moment. "Fear's natural, child. But remember what you read in church? Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You're not walking alone anymore." Later, after Kim had curled up on her pallet near the hearth, she heard Daniel moving quietly around the cabin. Through half-closed eyes, she watched him sit at his desk and light the lamp. He took out several sheets of paper, his quill, and his precious bottle of ink. Kim drifted between waking and sleeping as Daniel worked late into the night, the scratch of his quill a constant sound in the quiet cabin. She didn't know he was carefully drafting adoption papers, building a legal shield to protect her from Pike's schemes. She only knew that watching him work with such focused determination made her feel safer. Before sleep finally claimed her, Kim clasped her hands together under her quilt. "Please, God," she whispered, her prayer barely audible above the crackling fire. "Please don't let them take me away. Please let me stay here where I'm learning to be more than just a burden." The fire popped and settled, sending shadows dancing across the cabin's log walls. Outside, an owl called softly in the darkness. Inside, Daniel continued writing by lamplight, his jaw set with determination, while Kim finally slept, her tear-stained face peaceful in the firelight. Through the night, snow began falling again, as if nature herself sought to shield the cabin and its inhabitants from the threats that had ridden up their mountain trail. But Daniel wrote on, knowing that it would take more than snow to protect Kim from the dangers that were gathering like storm clouds on their horizon. The winter wind howled outside Daniel McCord's cabin, driving snow against the frosted window panes. Inside, the crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows across rough-hewn logs, while Kim bent over her primer, her finger tracing each word with careful determination. "And the shepherd," she read slowly, "watched over his flock by night." Daniel nodded from his chair by the fire, where he was rubbing his stiff shoulders. Hours of chopping wood in the bitter cold had left him aching, but a quiet pride warmed him as he watched Kim sound out the words. "Very good," he said. "Now, what does that passage remind you of?" Kim's face brightened. It's like the Christmas story we read last week, about the angels appearing to the shepherds in their fields." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected her to make the connection so quickly. "That's exactly right. You've got a good memory for scripture." A pleased flush colored Kim's cheeks. She had never been called good at anything before coming to live with Daniel. Each small praise felt like a precious gift, warming her from the inside out. "Let's try some figures now," Daniel said, pulling out a slate and chalk. "If I have 15 traps set out and check 8 of them, how many are left to check?" Kim's brow furrowed in concentration as she worked it out. 15, take away 8. That's 7 traps left." "Right again." Daniel scratched out another problem. "Now, if each trap holds 2 rabbits, how many rabbits would we find in those 7 traps?" Kim counted on her fingers for a moment. 2 times 7, 14 rabbits. Daniel couldn't hide his smile. The girl who had arrived at his door believing herself stupid was proving to have a quick and eager mind. "Well done. That's enough lessons for now, though. I've got something else in mind." Kim looked up curiously as Daniel rose and went to the corner of the cabin. He returned with something she had never seen before, a wooden sled with metal runners. "The storm's died down enough," he said, eyes twinkling. "What do you say we try this out on the hill behind the cabin?" Kim's eyes widened. "But won't it be dangerous?" "No more dangerous than letting good snow go to waste," Daniel replied. "Bundle up warm now. We'll take it slow." Soon, they were trudging through knee-deep snow to the gentle slope behind the cabin. The late afternoon sun broke briefly through the clouds, making the fresh powder sparkle like diamond dust. "Now then," Daniel positioned the sled at the top of the hill. "Sit here in front, and I'll sit behind to steer." Kim settled nervously onto the wooden slats, her heart pounding. Daniel's solid presence behind her was reassuring as he gripped the rope guides. "Ready?" he asked. Before she could answer, he pushed off with his feet, and the sled began to glide downhill. Kim gasped as they picked up speed, the cold wind stinging her cheeks. But then something remarkable happened. A bubble of laughter escaped her throat. They reached the bottom, and Kim turned to Daniel with shining eyes. "Can we do it again?" For the next hour, they climbed up and slid down the hill again and again. Kim's delighted squeals mixed with Daniel's deep chuckles as they occasionally toppled into snowdrifts. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed so freely. As the sun began to set, they made one final run down the hill. This time Kim threw her arms up in the air, shouting with pure joy as they flew over the snow. Daniel's laughter joined hers, echoing off the mountainside. Back in the cabin, they shook snow from their clothes and warmed themselves by the fire. Daniel prepared hot tea while Kim's cheeks still glowed from their adventure. "Thank you," she said softly. "I never knew winter could be so fun." Daniel handed her a steaming cup. "Winter's got its own kind of beauty if you know where to look for it." A knock at the door interrupted their peaceful moment. Daniel opened it to find Henry Running Deer standing on the porch, snow dusting his dark hair. "Evening, friend," Daniel said, ushering him inside. "You're welcome to share our fire." Henry nodded gratefully, but his expression was grave as he removed his coat. Kim noticed the tension in his shoulders and quietly slipped away to her sleeping pallet, though she remained alert to their conversation. "Brought you some more of those herbs for the girl," Henry said, placing a leather pouch on the table. "But that's not why I rode out in this weather." Daniel pulled out a chair. "What news from town?" Henry's voice dropped lower, but Kim could still make out his words. "Pike's been busy, buying drinks for the ranch hands, telling tales about how you're harboring his rightful property, getting them riled up about a mountain man thinking he's above the law." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I expected as much from him." "There's more," Henry continued. "He's promised extra pay to any man willing to help restore order when the time comes. And some are listening." From her corner, Kim pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, fear coiling in her stomach. But she forced herself to listen, determined to face whatever was coming. "How many?" Daniel asked. "Hard to say. Some of the older hands want no part of it. But the younger ones, the ones with more pride than sense." Henry shook his head. "Pike knows how to stir up trouble." Daniel rose and paced to the window, staring out into the gathering darkness. "He means to force my hand before I can file the adoption papers." "The snow's buying you some time," Henry said. "But when the trail's clear, we'll be ready." Daniel's voice held steel. "I won't let them take her, Henry." "You may not have a choice, my friend. One man alone." "He's not alone," Kim said suddenly, standing up from her pallet. Both men turned, surprised to find her listening. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "I won't be a coward anymore. I won't let Mr. Pike hurt Daniel because of me." Daniel crossed to her and placed his hands on her shoulders. "You listen to me, Kim. None of this is your fault. Pike's quarrel is with me, not you." "But no buts," Daniel said firmly. "Your job is to keep learning, keep growing stronger. Let me worry about Pike and his schemes." Kim met his eyes. "I'm not afraid anymore. Not like I was." A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's weathered face. "I know you're not. You're becoming quite a brave young lady." Henry watched this exchange with approval. "The girl has spirit," he said. "Pike may find he's underestimated both of you." After Henry left, Kim helped Daniel bank the fire for the night. As she laid down on her pallet, she thought about how different she felt from the terrified girl who had been abandoned in the snow just weeks ago. "Daniel," she whispered. "Yes?" "I meant what I said. I won't let you face trouble alone because of me." In the firelight, she saw Daniel's expression soften. "I know you meant it, but remember what I taught you about the Good Shepherd? He protects his flock," Kim answered. "That's right. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow brings more lessons." Kim closed her eyes, but her mind was racing. She thought about the joy of sledding down the snowy hill, the pride of reading difficult words, the warmth of Daniel's praise. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, truly valued. And she had made up her mind, no matter what Pike and his men planned, she would be brave. She would show Daniel that his faith in her wasn't misplaced. Like David facing Goliath, she would find her courage in knowing right was on her side. The fire popped and settled as Kim finally drifted off to sleep. Outside, the winter wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, a different kind of strength was growing. The quiet strength of a young girl learning her own worth, preparing to stand against whatever storms might come. Daniel sat at his desk long into the night, working on the adoption papers by lamplight, while Kim's steady breathing joined the whisper of the wind and the crackle of the dying fire. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, their mountain sanctuary held firm against the gathering storm. The morning dawned crisp and bright, the storm's fury finally spent. Sunlight sparkled off fresh snow, and icicles dripped steadily from the cabin's eaves. Daniel stood in the doorway, studying the clearing sky with a practiced eye. "Looks like we can make that supply run today," he announced, turning to Kim, who was sweeping near the hearth. "We're running low on flour and beans." Kim paused, her broom stilling. The thought of town made her stomach tighten, but she nodded. They did need supplies, and she wouldn't show her fear. Daniel hitched the wagon, while Kim wrapped herself in her warmest shawl. The snow-packed trail made for slow going, the wagon wheels crunching through crusty drifts. Kim sat close to Daniel on the wooden seat, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "Town might feel different today," Daniel said as they approached the first buildings. "Folk have had time to think on things." Kim thought of her Bible reading in church, how the words had trembled but held true. Do you really think so? Time has a way of changing minds, Daniel replied. Not all at once, mind you, but bit by bit. The main street was busy with morning traffic. Ranchers leading horses to the smithy, women carrying market baskets, children throwing snowballs. The wagon drew some looks, but they weren't all unkind. Daniel pulled up in front of the mercantile. The bell chimed as they entered, and Mr. Jenkins looked up from his ledger. His usual frown softened slightly at the sight of them. "Morning, McCord," he said. "Miss Kim." Kim's eyes widened at the greeting. It was the first time anyone in town besides Daniel had used her name. "We'll need 20 pounds of flour," Daniel said, "and 15 pounds of dried beans. Some coffee, too, if you've got it fresh." "Just got a shipment yesterday," Mr. Jenkins replied, moving to gather their order. As Daniel discussed prices, Kim noticed Mrs. Peterson and her daughter Sarah whispering near the fabric counter. She braced herself for mockery, but Sarah offered a hesitant wave. "That was some fine reading you did," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice carrying across the store. "At church, I mean. Wasn't expecting such clear speaking." "Thank you, ma'am," Kim managed, her cheeks warm. More customers entered, and Kim was surprised to receive several awkward but genuine nods of acknowledgement. Word of her Bible reading had spread, it seemed, and some townsfolk were beginning to see past her size to the person beneath. Daniel showed her how to check the flour for freshness and weevils. "Always look careful before you buy," he instructed. "Good housekeeping starts with good supplies." Kim felt a spark of pride at being trusted with such responsibility. She helped carry the supplies to the counter, only slightly winded by the effort. Weeks of chores had begun to strengthen her arms and back. As Mr. Jenkins tallied their purchases, the mercantile's door opened again. Kim felt the atmosphere shift before she even turned around. There in the doorway stood Mr. Pike, the saloon keeper, his dark eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. "Well, well," Pike drawled, taking a step inside. "If it ain't the mountain man and his ward." He spat the last word like it tasted bitter. Daniel moved smoothly between them, his voice level but firm. "We're just finishing our business here, Pike." "Funny thing about business," Pike said, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. "Sometimes deals get made that can't be unmade. Ain't that right, girl?" Kim's throat went dry, but she forced herself to stand straight. She wouldn't cower, not anymore. "The only dealing being done here is honest trade," Daniel replied. "Mr. Jenkins, we'll take those supplies now." The storekeeper hurriedly wrapped their purchases, clearly wanting no part of the tension crackling through his shop. Other customers found sudden interest in distant shelves or slipped quietly outside. Pike didn't move from his position near the door, his cold smile never wavering. "That warrant's coming, McCord. Might want to think about doing the sensible thing before things get complicated." "Threatening a man in public's not very sensible either," Daniel observed mildly, though Kim could see the steel in his eyes. "Come along, Kim. Let's get these loaded." They gathered their supplies, Daniel keeping himself between Kim and Pike as they moved toward the door. The saloon keeper stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy, but his hand never left his gun. Outside, Daniel helped Kim into the wagon, then efficiently loaded their purchases. Pike emerged onto the boardwalk, leaning against a post to watch them. Other townsfolk hurried past, averting their eyes from the scene. Daniel climbed up beside Kim and took the reins. As they pulled away, Kim couldn't help glancing back. Pike still stood there, his stance casual, but his eyes promising violence to come. They rode in silence until the town was well behind them. The winter sun had passed its peak, casting long shadows across the snow-covered trail. Finally, Kim found her voice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Daniel glanced at her, his brow furrowed. What for? For bringing trouble to your door, for making you face men like Pike, for ruining your peace. The wagon creaked to a halt. Daniel turned to face her fully, his expression serious. Now you listen here, he said firmly. First off, you didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you, and that's not the same thing at all. Second, Pike and his kind have always existed, preying on those they see as weak. Standing against such men ain't ruining peace, it's doing what's right. But he's dangerous, Kim protested. And he's got the law on his side, with those papers. Papers built on lies ain't worth the ink they're written with, Daniel replied. And as for dangerous, well, appearances can deceive, but courage never does. You showed more courage in that store today than Pike has shown in his whole life. I didn't feel very brave. That's exactly what makes it courage, Daniel said softly. Being scared but standing firm anyway, like you did in church with that psalm. They continued homeward, the wagon swaying gently through the snow. Kim thought about Daniel's words, about courage and appearances and doing what was right. She thought about how some townspeople had finally seen past her size to something more. The sun was setting by the time they reached the cabin. Daniel unloaded their supplies while Kim started the fire. Each familiar task felt different now, weighted with both purpose and uncertainty. After supper, Daniel checked the cabin's door, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. His rifle, normally stored in the corner, now stood within easy reach of his chair. The preparations weren't obvious, but Kim noticed them all the same. Later, lying on her pallet in the darkness, Kim listened to the night sounds of the cabin, the pop of the banking fire, the whisper of wind through chinks in the logs, Daniel's steady breathing from his bed across the room. Sleep eluded her as Pike's threatening smile played through her mind. She thought about the peace Daniel had enjoyed before she came, his quiet life of trapping and trading, teaching at the mission school when needed. Now he faced danger because of her, might even have to fight. The familiar feeling of being a burden crept back, heavy as a stone in her chest. But then she remembered Daniel's words about courage, about standing firm. She remembered the townspeople's changing attitudes, how Mrs. Peterson had praised her reading. Perhaps being brave wasn't about feeling no fear, but about choosing to act rightly despite it. The fire popped loudly, making her start. Daniel's rifle gleamed dully in the fading light, its presence both comforting and troubling. Kim pulled her quilt tighter, trying to find warmth against the chill of uncertainty. "Daniel?" she whispered into the darkness. "Yes? I'll try to be brave, no matter what comes." There was a moment of silence, then Daniel's voice came back, warm and sure. "I know you will, child. I know you will." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's shutters. But inside, despite her fears and doubts, Kim felt the first stirrings of a different kind of strength. Not the false bravado Pike displayed with his gun, but something quieter and truer. Something that grew stronger with each kindness shown, each skill learned, each small victory won. Sleep finally came, and with it, dreams not of Pike's threats but of standing tall in church, God's words flowing sure and strong from her lips, bringing light to the darkness. A week of uneasy peace had settled over the mountain. Winter's grip remained firm, with fresh snow dusting the pines each morning. Daniel maintained his routines, teaching Kim her letters and checking his trap lines, but his watchfulness never wavered. On this crisp morning, the sun glinted off ice-crusted branches as Daniel and Kim made their way down to Willow Creek. Daniel carried his trap satchel, while Kim insisted on helping with an armload of firewood they'd gather on their return trip. "Watch your step now," Daniel cautioned as they picked their way down the slope. "Creek ice can be treacherous, even when it looks solid." Kim nodded, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She'd grown steadier on her feet over the weeks, but the steep terrain still challenged her. The bundle of wood shifted in her arms as she carefully placed each foot. Daniel moved ahead, examining the creek bank for animal signs. His experienced eyes searched for tracks in the fresh powder. Raccoon, beaver, maybe even fox. He'd been teaching Kim to read these marks, though she still struggled to tell them apart. "See here," he called, kneeling beside a distinctive print. "What do you make of this one?" Kim stepped closer, eager to prove her learning, but as she moved, her boot struck a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. The wood scattered as she lost her balance, arms windmilling. "Oh!" she cried out, landing hard on her side. Pain shot through her hip, but more than anything, shame burned in her chest at her clumsiness. Daniel turned quickly at her fall. "Are you hurt?" "Only my pride," Kim mumbled, struggling to rise. Daniel stepped toward her, extending his hand. That's when they heard the crunch of boots on snow. 3 men emerged from the trees above them. Their rough appearance and the way they spread out spoke clear enough of their intentions. Kim recognized one as a regular from Pike's saloon. "Well, ain't this convenient?" the tallest one drawled, adjusting his worn leather gloves. "The mountain man and his pet, all alone." Daniel straightened slowly, positioning himself between Kim and the strangers. His voice came steady and firm. "This is private property, gentlemen. Best be on your way." The second man, sporting a ragged beard and a mean squint, spat into the snow. "Pike sends his regards. Says it's time you learned about respect for prior arrangements." "Any arrangement made without consent ain't worth the paper it's written on," Daniel replied. His hand hadn't moved toward his rifle, but Kim could see the tension in his shoulders. "Ain't asking for your opinion," the third man growled, taking a step forward. "Girl's coming with us, peaceful or otherwise." Kim scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. The men were spread out now, trying to flank them. Daniel remained perfectly still, like a deer sensing danger. "Last warning," Daniel said quietly. "Leave now, no harm done." The tall one laughed, an ugly sound. 3 against 1, old man. Them ain't good odds." It happened faster than Kim could follow. The bearded man lunged, but Daniel was already moving. His fist caught the attacker square in the jaw, sending him sprawling. The third man rushed in, swinging a heavy stick. Daniel deflected it, but caught a glancing blow to his ribs. Kim watched in horror as the 3 men closed in. Daniel fought with controlled precision, his movements economical and practiced. He dropped the tall one with a swift kick and managed to throw the third man off balance. But the bearded man had regained his feet. He charged forward, ramming his shoulder into Daniel's already injured side. Kim heard the sickening thud of impact, saw Daniel's face contort in pain. "Stop!" she screamed. "Please stop!" Whether it was her cry or the sound of distant horses that spooked them, the attackers suddenly broke off. The tall one helped his dazed companion up, and they retreated into the trees, leaving threats hanging in the cold air. "This ain't over, McCord." Daniel stood bent over, one arm wrapped around his ribs. His breath came in sharp gasps, forming white clouds in the frozen air. "Daniel?" Kim rushed to his side, terrified by how pale he looked. "Oh God, you're hurt!" "Not too bad," he managed, but his grimace told a different story. "Need to get back to the cabin." Kim slid under his arm, trying to support his weight despite their height difference. Together they began the arduous climb back up the slope. Every step seemed to cause Daniel pain, though he tried to hide it. The journey that had taken 20 minutes down took over an hour going back. By the time they reached the cabin, Daniel was leaning heavily on Kim, his face sheened with sweat despite the cold. Inside, Kim helped him to his chair by the fire. Her hands shook as she built up the flames, desperate to bring warmth to the room. Daniel sat silent, still holding his side. "Let me see," she insisted, fighting back tears. "Please." Carefully, she helped him remove his coat and shirt. Dark bruises were already forming along his right side. Kim bit her lip at the sight. guilt washing over her in waves. "This is my fault," she whispered, retrieving the herb pouch Henry had brought. "All my fault." Daniel caught her hand as she began mixing a poultice. His grip was firm, despite his pain. "No," he said hoarsely. "This is Pike's doing, not yours." "But if I wasn't here—" Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You wouldn't be hurt. You'd be safe." "Listen to me." Daniel's eyes held hers intently. "Every fight worth fighting comes with risk. You're worth this fight, Kim. Worth every bit of it." She wanted to protest, but the certainty in his voice stopped her. Instead, she focused on tending his injuries, applying the poultice and binding his ribs with strips torn from an old sheet. Her hands grew steadier as she worked, finding purpose in the task. The day faded into evening. Daniel refused supper, the pain making him nauseous. He allowed Kim to help him to his bed, where he collapsed with a barely suppressed groan. "Need to check the doors," he muttered, trying to rise again. "I'll do it," Kim assured him. "Rest now, please." She made sure he was settled, then moved through the cabin's familiar tasks. She barred the door and windows, banked the fire, and filled water buckets as Daniel had taught her. Each action felt weighted with new significance. In the growing darkness, Kim sat in Daniel's chair, watching him sleep. His breathing was shallow but steady, his face lined with pain even in rest. The rifle stood within reach, as it had every night lately, but now its presence felt more ominous than reassuring. Sleep eluded her as memories of the attack played through her mind. She saw again and again how Daniel had placed himself between her and danger, how he'd fought to protect her despite the odds. His words echoed in her thoughts. Worth every fight. The night stretched long before her, filled with the soft sounds of Daniel's labored breathing and the wind's lonely moan around the cabin's corners. Kim remained vigilant, her heart troubled, but her resolve growing stronger with each passing hour. Whatever came next, she would find a way to be worthy of such sacrifice. She reached for Daniel's Bible, drawing comfort from its worn leather binding. Opening to the Psalms they'd been studying, she read silently in the dying firelight, holding on to faith as the darkness pressed close around their wounded sanctuary. Shadows deepened in the cabin as the fire burned low. Kim sat rigid in Daniel's chair, her mind churning like the storm outside. Every groan of pain from Daniel's bed stabbed at her heart. The bruises he'd suffered defending her were her fault. All of it was her fault. Through the window, moonlight caught the falling snow. Kim watched the flakes swirl, each one a reminder of that first night when Daniel had taken her in. He had given her so much: shelter, knowledge, dignity. And how had she repaid him? By bringing violence to his peaceful home. Daniel shifted in his sleep, a muffled sound of discomfort escaping him. Kim clenched her fists. She couldn't bear to be the cause of more harm to this good man. The solution came to her with terrible clarity. If she left, gave herself up to Pike, the danger would leave with her. Daniel could return to his quiet life. The thought made her chest ache, but wasn't this what love did? Protect others, no matter the cost? With trembling hands, Kim found Daniel's writing materials. The quill felt clumsy in her grip as she carefully formed the letters he'd taught her. "I will end this trouble. Forgive me." She placed the note where he would find it, beside his morning coffee cup. Gathering her few belongings would make too much noise. Instead, she took only what she wore: the patched dress, worn boots, and the shawl Daniel had given her. The cabin door's latch lifted with a soft click that seemed to echo in the stillness. Outside, the cold hit her like a physical blow. Snow whirled thick around her, and the wind cut through her thin clothing. Kim forced herself forward, away from the warm light spilling through the cabin's windows. Each step felt like a betrayal of Daniel's kindness. but she steeled herself with the thought that this was the only way to keep him safe. The path to town stretched before her, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Kim trudged through deepening drifts, her legs already aching from the effort. The familiar landmarks, the lightning-struck pine, the split boulder, looked alien in the storm's fury. Time became meaningless. Kim walked until her feet went numb, until her face burned with cold, until her thoughts grew sluggish. She fell several times, the snow soaking through her dress. Each time, she forced herself back up, though her limbs shook with exhaustion. Back at the cabin, the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows. Daniel stirred, his ribs protesting as he shifted position. Something felt wrong. The cabin was too quiet, too still. "Kim," he called hoarsely. No answer came. Ignoring the pain in his side, Daniel pushed himself up. His experienced eyes swept the cabin, noting the missing shawl, the disturbed papers on his desk. Fear gripped him as he spotted the note, Kim's careful letters stark against the paper. "No," he whispered, reading the words. "Oh, child, no." Moving with desperate purpose despite his injuries, Daniel pulled on his coat. Each movement sent spikes of pain through his ribcage, but he barely noticed. He had to find her before Pike did. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, but the snow was deep. Daniel studied the ground, thanking God for the clear trail of small boot prints leading toward town. Still, hours had passed since Kim left, hours she'd spent alone in the deadly cold. The mule protested as Daniel saddled her, sensing his urgency. "Easy, girl," he murmured, though his own heart pounded with fear. "We've got to find her." They set out into the gray morning, following Kim's tracks. Daniel hunched in the saddle, fighting to stay focused through waves of pain. The town was over 5 miles away, far too far for a young girl to walk in this weather. Meanwhile, Kim had finally reached the outskirts of town. Her world had narrowed to placing one foot in front of the other. She barely felt the cold anymore, which some dim part of her mind knew was dangerous. The saloon's windows glowed yellow through the swirling snow, like cruel eyes watching her approach. Her legs gave out just yards from the saloon's steps. Kim crumpled into a drift, her consciousness fading. She thought she heard voices, felt rough hands grabbing her arms, but everything seemed distant and unreal. "Well, look what the storm blew in," a harsh voice laughed. "Get her inside before she freezes solid." 2 of Pike's men dragged Kim's limp form through the saloon doors. The blast of warmth made her skin prickle painfully. Through half-closed eyes, she saw the saloon keeper's boots approach. "So the mountain man's pet finally came to her senses," Pike sneered, crouching to study her face. "Throw her in the back room. Once she thaws out, we'll discuss her new position here." The men hauled Kim through a door behind the bar. They dropped her onto a pile of empty grain sacks, her wet clothes immediately soaking the rough fabric. One of them tossed a threadbare blanket over her before they left, locking the door behind them. Kim curled into herself, shivering violently as feeling returned to her limbs. The room smelled of stale beer and tobacco. Voices and raucous laughter filtered through the thin walls, normal sounds for a saloon, even this early in the day. She thought of Daniel, imagining him finding her note. Would he understand that she'd done this to protect him? Or would he think she'd simply given up, proving her father right about her worthlessness? The possibility brought fresh tears to her eyes, freezing on her cheeks. Out on the trail, Daniel urged his mule forward as fast as he dared in the deep snow. Each hoofbeat sent jolts of pain through his injured ribs, but he barely noticed. His whole being was focused on following Kim's tracks before the slowly falling snow obscured them completely. He found places where she had fallen, the snow disturbed by her struggles to rise. Each sign of her difficult journey tore at his heart. She had done this for him, left the safety of home because she thought it would protect him. Foolish, brave girl, he muttered, scanning the white landscape ahead. Hold on, I'm coming. The town's buildings gradually took shape through the swirling snow. Daniel's jaw tightened as he spotted where Kim's tracks led, straight to Pike's saloon. Of course she would go there, thinking to give herself up and end the conflict. But Daniel knew better. Pike wouldn't be satisfied with just claiming Kim. The saloon keeper would use her to break Daniel's spirit, to show everyone that standing against him was futile. Well, Pike was about to learn differently. Daniel carefully dismounted, gasping as the movement pulled at his injured side. He tied the mule to a hitching post, his mind already racing through possibilities. Kim was inside that building, probably frightened and half frozen. He had to get her out, but charging in wounded and alone would only get them both killed. He needed help, and in this town, there was only one person he trusted enough to ask. Straightening as much as his ribs would allow, Daniel turned away from the saloon. Henry Runningdeer's trading post was just 2 streets over. If anyone would understand about protecting an innocent from those who would exploit them, it would be Henry. Dawn had fully broken now, painting the snow-covered town in shades of pink and gold. But to Daniel, it felt like racing against darkness. Every minute Kim spent in Pike's power was a minute too long. He touched the Bible in his coat pocket, drawing strength from its presence. "Hold on, child," he whispered into the morning air. "Just hold on." Inside the saloon's back room, Kim huddled under the thin blanket. Feeling had returned painfully to her extremities, but a bone-deep weariness kept her from moving. She listened to the sounds from the main room, each laugh and shout making her flinch. What had she done? In trying to protect Daniel, had she only made things worse? Prayer rose to her lips, fragments of psalms Daniel had taught her, mixed with desperate pleas for help. The lock rattled. Kim tensed as the door swung open, revealing Pike's broad figure. The saloon keeper filled the doorway, a cold smile playing across his face. "Welcome home, girl," he said softly. "Welcome home." Daniel's boots crunched through deepening snow as he made his way to Henry Runningdeer's trading post. Each step sent daggers of pain through his injured ribs, but determination drove him forward. The morning light cast long shadows across the empty street as he approached the wooden building with its hand-painted sign. Henry was already awake, arranging dried herbs in neat bundles. He looked up sharply at Daniel's entrance, reading the situation in his friend's tight expression and labored breathing. "Kim has gone to Pike," Daniel said without preamble, one hand pressed to his side. Henry set down the herbs and crossed to Daniel's side. "Your ribs are worse," he observed quietly. "But that is not what brings you here. She left before dawn, thinks she's protecting me." Daniel's voice was rough with emotion. "Pike's men have her at the saloon. I need your help, my friend." Henry's dark eyes hardened. "The girl has spirit. Pike will try to break it." He moved to gather his coat and rifle. "We will not let him succeed." Relief flooded Daniel's face. "Thank you," he said simply. "No thanks needed between brothers," Henry replied, checking his ammunition. "But we must be wise. Pike has many friends in town." They stepped out into the strengthening daylight. The storm had eased to gentle snowfall, but the wind still bit cold. Henry studied the sky with practiced eyes. "More snow coming tonight," he predicted. "We should use the day to plan. Pike will expect you to charge in angry." Daniel nodded grudgingly. His every instinct screamed to rush to Kim's rescue, but Henry was right. They needed strategy, not just determination. "The pastor," Daniel said suddenly. "Reverend Matthews has influence with the town council, and he spoke kindly to Kim at services." "A good thought," Henry agreed. 3 voices carry more weight than 2. They made their way to the small parsonage beside the church. Reverend Matthews answered their knock promptly, his expression growing grave as Daniel explained the situation. "This is troubling news indeed," the pastor said, ushering them inside. "I had feared Pike might try something like this. The man has too much influence in this town." "Will you help us?" Daniel asked directly. The pastor studied both men for a long moment. "What you propose could turn violent." "We pray it will not," Henry said quietly. "But sometimes standing against evil requires risk." Reverend Matthews nodded slowly. Yes, it does." He reached for his coat. "Let me speak to some of the council members. Pike's treatment of that poor girl has disturbed many good people. We may find more allies than you expect." The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel paced the pastor's study while Henry and Reverend Matthews moved through town, gathering information and testing the waters with potential supporters. Daniel's thoughts kept returning to Kim, alone and frightened in Pike's clutches. The image tormented him. He pulled out her note, reading again her shaky writing. "I will end this trouble. Forgive me." "Oh, child," he whispered, "there is nothing to forgive." Henry returned as afternoon shadows lengthened across the snow. "Pike keeps her in a back room," he reported. "2 men guard the door, but they drink heavily, and their attention wanders." "The sheriff?" Daniel asked. "Conveniently out of town until tomorrow." Henry's tone was bitter. Pike planned this well. Reverend Matthews arrived shortly after, bringing cautious hope. "Several council members are troubled by Pike's actions. They won't interfere if we move tonight." Daniel straightened, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "Then we move tonight." They spent the remaining daylight hours planning. Henry knew the saloon's layout from his trading days. The pastor provided details about which townspeople might help or hinder them. Daniel cleaned his rifle with methodical care, though he prayed he wouldn't need to use it. As dusk approached, snow began falling heavily again. The 3 men gathered in the church to make final preparations. Reverend Matthews lit a lamp, its glow casting their shadows large against the wooden walls. "Remember," Henry cautioned, "Pike will try to provoke bloodshed. He knows killing would turn the town against us." Daniel nodded grimly. "I won't give him the satisfaction." "I will speak to him first," the pastor said. "Perhaps reason can still prevail." "Pike doesn't listen to reason," Daniel replied, "but we'll try it your way." They waited until full dark, when the saloon would be crowded and noisy. Snow swirled thick around them as they made their way down the street. Light and music spilled from the saloon's windows, along with rough laughter and the clash of glasses. Daniel's grip tightened on his rifle. Every step brought back memories of Kim's quiet courage, her tentative smile when she mastered a new skill, her trembling voice reading scripture. He had promised to protect her. He would not fail her now. Henry moved like a shadow beside him, alert for any threat. The pastor walked tall, his Bible tucked under one arm. Together they presented a striking picture: mountain man, Cherokee trader, and minister united in purpose. They paused in the snow-filled street, watching the saloon's swinging doors. Inside, someone struck up a raucous tune on an out-of-tune piano. Daniel took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Remember," Henry said softly, "we come for Kim. Nothing else matters." "Amen," the pastor added. Daniel nodded once, sharply, then he stepped forward, pushing through the knee-deep snow. Each step felt heavy with purpose. The saloon's light drew them like moths to flame. At the bottom of the steps, Daniel paused. He thought of Kim, probably huddled in some dark back room, believing she had sacrificed herself to save him. His heart clenched with fierce protective love. The piano music crashed to a discordant halt as Daniel shoved open the saloon doors. Snow swirled in behind him as he stepped inside, Henry and the pastor flanking him. The crowded room fell silent, all eyes turning to the unlikely trio in the doorway. Daniel's gaze swept the room, noting Pike's men reaching for weapons, but his focus settled on the closed door behind the bar. Somewhere beyond it, Kim waited. And he had come to take her home. The smoky haze inside the saloon hung thick as Daniel stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Conversations died away as patrons turned to stare. Behind the bar, Pike's face twisted into a cruel smile. "Well, well, the mountain hermit comes to town." Pike's voice dripped with mockery. "Looking for something?" "You know why I am here," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the pain in his ribs. "Where is Kim?" Pike spread his hands in false innocence. "The girl?" "She came to me willingly." He reached beneath the bar and pulled out a sheaf of papers. "And I have legal right to her services, signed by her own father." "Those papers are worth nothing," Daniel declared. Several men shifted uneasily at the steel in his voice. "The law says different." Pike slapped the papers on the bar. "Sheriff's already seen them. Girl's mine, fair and square." Henry stepped forward, his dark eyes fixed on Pike. "There is nothing fair about selling a child into bondage." "Now see here," Pike bristled. "I won't have some Indian telling me." "Enough!" The pastor's commanding tone cut through the tension. "Mr. Pike, you claim legal right. Very well. Daniel?" Daniel reached into his coat and withdrew his own carefully prepared documents. "I claim something stronger. Adoption papers, witnessed and signed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Pike's face darkened with rage. The saloon doors swung open again, admitting a blast of cold air and the sheriff, drawn by the commotion. He stomped snow from his boots, taking in the scene. "What's all this, then?" "Sheriff," Daniel said firmly, "I request you examine these papers. They establish my legal right as Kim's guardian." The sheriff accepted both sets of documents, studying them in the lamplight. The room held its breath. Pike's men fingered their weapons while Henry watched them with careful attention. Finally, the sheriff looked up. "Pike's indenture is invalid without the mother's signature, but these adoption papers..." He nodded slowly. "They're properly witnessed and filed. They stand..." "This is outrageous!" Pike slammed his fist on the bar. "That girl is my property." "No person is property," Daniel said, his quiet words carrying to every corner of the room. "Where is she?" Pike glared, but the weight of townspeople's stares pressed upon him. Even his usual supporters looked uncomfortable. With a curse, he jerked his head toward the back room. Daniel strode through the parting crowd. The door opened before he reached it, and Kim stumbled out, tears streaming down her face. She ran to Daniel, clutching his arm as if afraid he might vanish. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. I only wanted to protect you." Daniel wrapped his good arm around her shoulders, turning to face the room. His voice rang with authority as he declared, "This child is mine, given by God. Let any man who disputes it step forward now." No one moved. Even Pike turned away, muttering darkly but offering no challenge. The crowd began to disperse, many nodding approval as they passed. Morning sunlight sparkled on fresh snow as Daniel's mule plodded steadily homeward. Kim pressed close against his back in the saddle, her arms wrapped tightly around his middle. Neither had spoken much since leaving town, both processing the events at the saloon. The familiar sight of Daniel's cabin emerged through the trees, smoke curling from the chimney where they'd left the banked fire. Kim's grip tightened as they approached, and Daniel could feel her trembling. "We're home," he said softly, bringing the mule to a stop. Kim slid down awkwardly, her legs unsteady. Daniel dismounted more slowly, favoring his injured ribs. He led the mule to the barn, while Kim stood uncertainty in the yard, hugging herself against more than just the cold. Inside the cabin, warmth from the rekindled fire gradually chased away the morning chill. Daniel settled into his chair by the hearth, watching Kim hover near the door. "Come sit," he said, gesturing to the other chair. When she perched on its edge, he leaned forward, meeting her eyes. "Kim, listen close. What you did was brave but foolish. You must never again believe you're worthless enough to sacrifice yourself." Tears welled in her eyes. "But you got hurt because of me. I thought, if I went away—" "No." Daniel's voice was firm but gentle. "My choice to protect you was just that. My choice. Your worth isn't measured by the troubles others bring. It's given by God Himself." Kim dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve, considering his words. The cabin fell quiet, except for the crackling fire and the soft whisper of wind outside. As evening approached, bootsteps crunched in the snow outside. Daniel smiled at the familiar rhythm, Henry Running Deer's measured stride. He opened the door before Henry could knock. "Welcome, friend," Daniel said warmly. Henry stomped snow from his boots and stepped inside, his dark eyes twinkling as they found Kim. "Young sister," he said, "you showed great courage." Kim blushed, looking down, but Henry wasn't finished. From his coat, he withdrew a small leather pouch decorated with intricate beadwork in blue and white patterns. "This is for you," he said, holding it out. "My grandmother made it long ago. She said it carries medicine for the spirit." Kim accepted it carefully, running her fingers over the smooth beads. Henry tapped his chest. "Strength is carried here," he said, then gestured to her body. "Not here. Remember this." A shy smile crossed Kim's face. Small, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. They shared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, the conversation flowing easier than before. When Henry took his leave, the peace he'd brought remained. As darkness settled outside, Daniel retrieved his Bible from the shelf. Kim wrapped herself in a quilt, settling into her chair as he opened to the Book of Psalms. His deep voice filled the cabin with familiar words of comfort. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Kim's eyes drifted closed, her fingers still touching the beaded pouch in her lap. For the first time since her father had abandoned her on Daniel's doorstep, true peace settled over her heart. She was home, she was safe, and most importantly, she was worthy of both. Daniel's voice continued steady and sure, carrying God's promises into the quiet night. Outside, stars emerged in the crystal-clear sky, and the mountain winds gentled to a whisper. The December wind lost its bitter edge as Christmas drew near. Soft snowflakes drifted down like feathers, coating the mountain in pristine white. Daniel watched through the cabin window as Kim attempted to sweep the path clear, her movements more confident than those first uncertain days. "Reckon it's time we brought some Christmas cheer inside," Daniel called, pulling on his heavy coat. "How about we find ourselves a tree?" Kim's face brightened. Together they trudged through knee-deep snow to a grove of young pines. Daniel showed her how to judge a tree's shape, explaining how the lower branches needed to be full enough to hold decorations. "This one?" Kim pointed to a modest pine, about 5 feet tall. "Perfect size," Daniel agreed, unsheathing his axe. The tree fell with a soft thump into the snow. Kim grabbed the top while Daniel lifted the heavier base, and together they dragged it back to the cabin, leaving a deep furrow in the snow. Inside, Daniel secured it in a corner using wooden blocks and rope. Kim gathered scraps of colorful cloth from her sewing basket, carefully cutting them into strips. Her stitches were still uneven as she tied them into bows, but her face glowed with concentration. Daniel strung dried berries onto thread, while from his pocket he drew out a surprise, a wooden star he'd carved in secret moments. "It's beautiful," Kim breathed, touching the smooth edges reverently. "Would you like to place it on top?" Daniel asked. Kim needed his help to reach, but when the star settled into place, she stepped back with a laugh of pure joy. The humble decorations transformed the tree into something magical in the lamplight. Henry arrived as dusk fell, carrying a rabbit he'd snared. Soon the cabin filled with savory stew smells and the warmth of friendship. Stories and laughter flowed freely around the table, making the small space feel full in a way it hadn't for years. "You've brought light back to these old walls," Daniel told Kim softly as Henry regaled them with a tale about outsmarting a clever fox. "This place was mighty lonely before you came." Later, as Kim settled into her bed, she clasped her hands and whispered a prayer of gratitude. Looking at the decorated tree glowing in the dying firelight, she felt it in her heart at last. She truly belonged here. This was home. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear. The cabin glowed with amber light from the hearth, where Daniel had already stoked the fire to chase away the mountain chill. Kim stirred beneath her quilts, drawn from sleep by the sweet scent of pine and wood smoke. "Merry Christmas, daughter," Daniel said softly from his chair by the fire. In his weathered hands, he held a small package wrapped in brown paper and twine. Kim sat up, her eyes wide. No one had ever given her a Christmas gift before. With trembling fingers, she untied the string and carefully folded back the paper. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its cover smooth and supple. "It's a journal," Daniel explained, his voice gentle, "for writing down your thoughts and the scripture verses that speak to your heart. Every word you write will be yours alone." Tears welled in Kim's eyes as she traced the careful stitching along the spine. Daniel had crafted it himself, she realized, thinking of the hours he must have spent preparing the pages and binding them together. It was a gift that said she mattered, that her thoughts were worth preserving. Unable to speak, Kim rose and wrapped her arms around Daniel in a fierce hug. He held her close, his strong hands steady on her back as she cried into his shoulder. "Come," he said after a moment. "Let's greet this Christmas morning proper." Together they stepped outside, their boots crunching in the fresh powder. The rising sun painted the mountain peaks in rose and gold, while the valley below lay hushed under its blanket of white. Kim drew in a deep breath of crystal air, feeling it fill her lungs. For the first time in her life, she stood tall, unashamed of her size or shape. Here, beside this good man who had chosen her, she knew herself cherished. Daniel's arm settled warm across her shoulders. "You are my daughter now and always," he said, his words carrying the weight of a sacred vow. They bowed their heads together in the growing light, giving thanks for the miracle of family found in the midst of winter's cold. As the sun crowned the mountains, their figures stood silhouetted against the dawn. Father and daughter, once strangers, now bound together in love and faith, their redemption complete. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.